Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight you'll experience what it was like to live in Fascist Italy, a time and place where obedience was patriotic, silence was survival, and even the air seemed to salute. Before we start this journey, do me one small favour. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. If you'd prefer these stories without ads, you can join the Patreon. It's linked in the description. And if you want the ultimate immersive experience, consider using a pair of wireless earbuds. They're comfortable, discreet, and designed so you can wear them even while sleeping. I've linked my favourite pair plus other sleep tools in the description. Now, lie back, get comfortable. Let's begin. You stand in the street as the parade passes. The air smells of oil, leather, and damp pavement, and the sound of drums rolls through the buildings like a heartbeat too large for one city. The men marching wear black shirts, their boots gleaming, their steps so perfectly matched that even the sound of them seems rehearsed. Banners ripple between them, crimson and white against the dull grey of post-war walls. Someone behind you shouts, "Viva l'Italia!" and the crowd answers in one voice, as though relieved to have something to shout again. After years of strikes, hunger, and confusion, it feels like order returning. Though you're not yet sure what kind, you clap because everyone else does. You tell yourself it's for stability, not for the man waving from the balcony. Your wife watches from the window above, one hand shading her eyes, the other resting on the sill, as if steadying the house itself. The children press against the glass behind her, too young to understand the words, but old enough to sense that they matter. In the weeks that follow, the newspapers fill with new words: rebirth, renewal, destiny. The headlines seem louder, printed in thicker ink, as though volume itself were a virtue. The editorials praise a nation finally standing tall after humiliation and disorder. You read them at breakfast, half believing, half grateful for the certainty they offer. The chaos of the past decade, the strikes, the veterans begging in the streets, the fear of another civil war, seems to recede under the rhythm of slogans. The black shirts become a daily sight. They patrol the piazza with a swagger that borders on ceremony, stopping to salute each other in the street. Their faces are young and hard, their collars pressed high. People step aside to let them pass. Not out of fear exactly, but something close to it, like the instinct to move for an oncoming train. At night, you hear them singing through the alleys, the chorus echoing off the walls, "Giovinezza, Giovinezza." You lie in bed and listen, unable to tell whether the sound is celebration or warning. New posters bloom on the walls each morning. At first they're simple, slogans, a flag, a name. Then they multiply, portraits of a square-jawed man with piercing eyes, posters promising discipline, pride and work. You see them everywhere, on the tram, at the post office, even on the backs of your kids' school books. People begin to speak differently. In cafes, voices drop when politics arise, but in the next breath, someone praises the new government for bringing order. You learn to nod at the right times. The conversations feel rehearsed, but no one complains. After the endless shouting of the old days, quiet seems like progress. The city itself feels tidier. Strikes are forbidden. Newspapers close. Graffiti disappears from the walls. Even the beggars are fewer, though you can't say where they've gone. There's less to discuss, but somehow more to admire. In the evenings, you walk home through streets lined with flags. The colours look brighter under the new electric lamps the city has installed, and you wonder whether they were always this red, this white, this green. The air carries a new rhythm, snatches of marching songs, the clatter of typewriters in newspaper offices, the metallic hiss of a new radio transmitter broadcasting from Rome. Every sound feels coordinated, as if the country itself were learning to breathe in time. You catch yourself humming one of the patriotic tunes under your breath. It's catchy, and you tell yourself that's all it is. When Mussolini's speeches play over the radio, people stop what they're doing. The first time you hear his voice, it sounds theatrical, full of pauses that invite applause, even when he isn't there to receive it. The words are simple: order, pride, strength, and they seem designed to fill space more than to mean anything specific. Yet the effect is undeniable. The shopkeeper next door stands at attention by his counter. Your neighbour lowers his head as though in prayer. You realise you're listening too, leaning toward the sound like warmth from a fire. There's a sense of energy returning to things. Construction projects restart, parades become regular, and posters promise that Italy will soon be great again. The phrase repeats until it becomes furniture in your mind, solid, unquestioned, impossible to move. You notice the children play differently now, forming mock marches instead of games of chase. They imitate the salute with startling precision, their laughter blending with the rhythmic call of the drums from the radio. You feel proud and uneasy at the same time. One evening you pass a small tailor's shop that used to hang a faded Union flag in its window. Now the window is spotless, and a neatly pressed black shirt hangs in its place. Inside, the tailor is the same man he's always been, but he smiles too quickly when you wave. You can't tell whether he's proud of the display or afraid not to be. You keep walking, realizing that nearly every window on the street now has something similar. A flag, a poster, a portrait. The whole city has dressed itself in the same uniform. The language of politics begins to seep into ordinary conversation. The word fascist stops sounding political and starts sounding descriptive, like neighbour or worker. You hear people use it approvingly. A fascist baker, a fascist mother. The newspapers run stories about the discipline of the new Italy, about villages that raised production by 10%, about boys who march barefoot to school in honour of the Duchy. You clip one of the stories to show your children, not because you agree, but because it feels like something they should know, something everyone should. In the months that follow, the black shirts fade from spectacle into background. You stop noticing them until you catch your reflection in a shop window and realise you're standing straighter too. The crowds that once watched the marches now form them. Every holiday becomes a festival. Every errand a demonstration. Even the church bells seem to ring in step with the drumbeat of the state. You start to measure time not by seasons but by anniversaries. The March on Rome, the founding of the party, the Duchy's birthday. The rhythm of public life merges with your own. You learn when to cheer, when to keep still, when to look impressed. It's easier than thinking. The feeling of relief that came with the first parade has hardened into habit. People no longer ask if the new Italy is better. They ask how to serve it. You begin to forget what disagreement sounded like. One morning you walk into work and find a framed photograph hanging above the door. Mussolini's face, stern and certain, watching the room like an overseer who never tires. Later that week, you see the same portrait at the grocer's and the post office. It appears on calendars, cigarette boxes, even matchbooks. The new Italy has settled in, quietly, like weather that's changed overnight. You start to notice how people walk. There's a rhythm to it that wasn't there before. Straight-backed, confident, deliberate. Even on narrow side streets, where there's no room for show, you see the same posture repeated. Chin lifted, steps in even time, arms held close to the sides. The black shirts have taught the country to march without needing a parade. You find yourself imitating it, at first out of curiosity, later out of habit. Your shoulders remember what your mind forgets. In the mornings, you pass workers heading to the tram, clerks unlocking offices, students with satchels bouncing against their legs. Everyone moves in tempo. The city hums like a metronome. At intersections, You catch the brief synchronized rise of hands, palms extended, arms angled perfectly forward. The fascist salute has replaced the handshake. It's efficient, hygienic, modern. The newspapers say it shows unity. What it really shows is who's willing to be seen. You learn the rhythm of the salute slowly, through observation. At first you raise your arm too late, then too stiffly, then too casually. A neighbour corrects you with gentle amusement, like someone teaching a dance step. You practice until it feels natural, though it never quite does. You begin to recognise the subtle differences. The way soldiers salute higher, bureaucrats with precision, shopkeepers with a trace of hesitation, they hide behind smiles. Everyone understands that timing matters more than enthusiasm. The radio in the piazza plays Giovinezza each morning now. The song spills from loudspeakers in bursts of brass and pride, echoing off the walls until even the pigeons seem to flap in rhythm. At first you hum along absent-mindedly, then you catch yourself tapping your fingers to it while waiting in line for bread. One afternoon your eldest joins in, singing the words with the earnestness of a school lesson. He grins when he reaches the refrain. Per Benito Mussolini, eia, eia, alla la. You smile back, because what else can you do? Uniforms multiply. They appear where you least expect them, on postal clerks, railway workers, even the man who collects the trash. There's a uniform for every profession now, and a salute to match. The variety is almost theatrical. Caps tilted at identical angles, shoes polished to a mirror shine. When you leave the house in your ordinary coat, you start to feel underdressed, as though failing to meet some invisible standard. Your wife notices and sews new buttons on your jacket, firmer ones, the kind that catch the light. She tells you that looking proper is safer. At work, formality seeps into routine. Meetings begin with salutes, not handshakes. You rise automatically when the supervisor enters, his lapel gleaming with a small enamel badge of the fasces. Once, you would have found it ridiculous. Now you just note that everyone else wears one too. The company newsletter congratulates those who've joined the local party branch. You haven't, but you start attending their gatherings anyway, if only to avoid standing out. They're dull affairs, endless recitations of slogans, but the drinks afterward are free, and someone always plays the accordion. Speech changes too. There's a right way to say things now, a tone that conveys loyalty without excess. You learn that enthusiasm can be dangerous if it sounds insincere, but restraint can sound subversive. Most people settle somewhere in between, speaking with the precision of actors afraid of forgetting their lines. Even jokes become standardized. The safe ones are repeated until they lose their humor. In the evenings, the street outside fills with echoes of drills. The local youth brigade practices on the cobblestones, their boots pounding the rhythm of unity. You stand at the window with your wife, watching as the torchlight wavers against the walls. She remarks that at least the boys are learning discipline, that they'll be strong men one day. You nod, though the word discipline leaves a bad taste in your mouth. The crowd below cheers as the leader calls out the count. For a moment it almost sounds like celebration. In the mornings you catch sight of your reflection in a shop window as you walk to work. You're standing taller than you used to, your shoulders squared. You don't remember deciding to. The posture feels efficient, professional. When you greet people, your hand twitches upward before your mind catches up. Once, in a rush, you saluted a stranger by mistake. He returned it without question, and neither of you broke stride. That's when you realize the salute no longer belongs to politics. It belongs to rhythm, to habit, to gravity itself. Not everyone adapts. There's an old man near the post office who still tips his hat instead of saluting. The younger clerks mock him behind his back, calling him vecchio socialista, meaning old socialist. One morning you see him stopped by a policeman who asks a few pointed questions. Nothing dramatic, but enough to draw a small crowd. The next day, the old man isn't there. You tell yourself he's fallen ill, though no one seems to know his name. The empty space he leaves on the bench looks deliberate, as though it too has learned how to stand at attention. The city begins to move like a single organism. Trams glide through intersections just as columns of workers cross. The bells of the churches ring on the half hour, perfectly in sync with the music from the radio. There's something hypnotic about it, a collective pulse. Even the pigeons seem to circle in formation. You remember the chaos after the war, the shouting in the streets, the uncertainty that felt like sickness. Compared to that, this new order feels like health. You tell yourself that's progress, even as the air grows thinner. One afternoon, a parade passes through town, a celebration of productivity or unity or some other word that means obedience. The crowd gathers as if pulled by gravity. Children are lifted onto shoulders. Vendors sell paper flags and roasted chestnuts. You find yourself among them, the sunlight flashing off brass instruments, the air thick with applause. The procession is flawless, rows of men moving as one, their boots striking the stones like a single drum. As the columns approach, the front rank raises their arms, a forest of hands cutting the air in perfect unison. You hesitate. It's only for a moment, a fraction of a second where you forget what to do. You feel the weight of stillness around you, the invisible turn of heads, the breath of the man beside you catching in his throat. The air seems to hold its balance. Then you raise your arm. The motion is smooth, practiced, correct. The moment passes, the crowd resumes its rhythm, and the parade moves on. For a brief instant, you wonder whether anyone noticed. Then you realize it doesn't matter. The fear fades as quickly as it came. The gesture feels almost natural. One day you notice that your children have new school books. They bring them home one afternoon. Their covers stamped with a new emblem, a bundle of rods bound around an axe. The fascism. The symbol is everywhere now, printed in the corners of pages, embossed on the blackboard, stitched onto the sleeves of their uniforms. The old lessons are still there, arithmetic, handwriting, geography, but the margins hum with new words: discipline, sacrifice, destiny. The pages smell of fresh ink and something sharper, a kind of authority you can't quite name. Your wife flips through one of the books at the kitchen table, her thumb leaving a faint smear of flour on the Duce's portrait printed inside the front cover. "He looks stern," she says quietly. You answer that he's meant to. The children don't hear her. They're already humming a tune they learned at school, the same one that plays every morning from the radio. The rhythm is bright, almost cheerful, until you listen closely and realize the words are about obedience. The next day they return wearing small triangular scarves, knotted neatly at the throat. Black for boys, white for girls. They beam with pride as they explain the names: Opera Nazionale Balilla for the boys, Piccole Italiane for the girls. Their teachers have told them the names are ancient, drawn from heroes and mothers of the nation. They stand in the doorway practicing their salutes, palms forward, faces serious. You tell them they look very smart. Your wife claps softly, as though applauding a play she didn't choose to attend. At first you think it's harmless. The children need structure after all. The country is rebuilding, the future uncertain. Perhaps discipline will make them strong. You remember your own schooling, cold classrooms, dull lessons, a teacher whose cane was quicker than his praise. By comparison, this new system seems efficient, modern, proud. When you visit for Parents' Day, the classroom gleams with order, desks aligned perfectly, the national flag hanging above the blackboard, the Duce's face watching from a gilded frame. The teacher welcomes you with a salute instead of a handshake, and you find yourself returning it automatically. The lessons themselves sound like sermons. You sit in the back of the room as the children recite from memory the Credo Fascista, meaning fascist creed. Their voices are clear and unwavering. I believe in Rome, the eternal, they chant, in the genius of Mussolini, in the destiny of Italy. The teacher smiles as if witnessing a prayer. You glance at your son and wonder if he understands the words or simply enjoys the rhythm. Either way, he's learning them faster than multiplication. Recess has changed too. The courtyard where the children once played tag is now a drill ground. Lines of boys march in formation while a whistle snaps the air. The girls practice rhythmic exercises, moving in unison with sticks painted white to resemble rifles. A large banner stretches across the far wall. Credere, obbedire, combattere, believe, obey, fight. You watch through the iron gate as your son marches past, his small boots kicking up dust. When he catches your eye, he smiles and salutes, proud of how straight his arm is. You return the gesture, and something in you goes still. At home, the children bring their lessons to the dinner table. They talk about how Italy is rising again, how every true citizen must serve, how the Duce is working tirelessly for peace and strength. They repeat the slogans as if they're facts, obvious, eternal. Your wife nods politely, but changes the subject to the weather, to the price of flour, to anything that sounds normal. After the meal, the children clear their plates without being asked. You watch them march the dishes to the sink, like soldiers on a mission. It should please you. It doesn't. The next week, the teacher sends a note inviting all parents to the Day of the Fatherland. The children will perform songs and drills in the piazza. You take the afternoon off work and stand in the crowd with the other parents. The sun beats down on rows of polished buttons and stiff collars. The boys raise their wooden rifles in salute. The girls wave flags in perfect rhythm. A loudspeaker crackles and Mussolini's voice fills the square, deep, deliberate, absolute. The children fall silent as if the sound itself commands them. When the song ends, the crowd erupts in applause. You join in without thinking, clapping until your hands sting. Afterward, the teacher praises your son's performance. A true young fascist, she says warmly. You smile, unsure whether it's a compliment or a diagnosis. Your son beams, his cheeks flushed with pride. On the walk home, he tells you he wants to join the summer camp near the coast, where the boys train with real rifles and sleep in tents under the stars. He describes it like an adventure, a reward for obedience. Your wife hesitates, then agrees it might be good for him. To make friends, to see the country. You nod, though you both know that refusing would draw attention. By late summer, the uniforms no longer seem special. They're just clothes. The children wear them even on Sundays, their salutes as natural as waving goodbye. The neighbours' children do the same, and the parents smile approvingly at one another in the street. Everyone's children are disciplined now, patriotic, orderly. When you see a child without a scarf, it looks wrong, like an unpolished shoe. The teachers praise those who volunteer for extra drills. The newspapers publish their photographs beneath the caption, "Children of the Wolf." The phrase sounds noble, ancient, and faintly predatory. One evening, as the family prepares for bed, your son reads aloud from a school pamphlet about the future of Italy. His voice is steady, proud, filled with conviction. The Duce works for us all, he says. He never sleeps. He loves the people as a father loves his children. Your wife listens quietly, her hands folded in her lap. When he finishes, she says, "That's very nice," and sends him to brush his teeth. You remain at the table, staring at the pamphlet left open under the lamp. The ink smells of new paper and certainty. Later that night, as you're turning out the lights, you mention to your wife that Mussolini is just a man, after all. She doesn't answer. From the next room, your son's voice drifts through the door. "He's not just a man, Papa. He's the father of Italy." The words are polite, matter of fact, as though he's correcting an arithmetic mistake. You laugh softly, to show there's no harm done, but the sound rings hollow in the quiet house. When the lights are out and the children asleep, You lie awake beside your wife, staring at the ceiling. You can still hear the faint echo of marching songs outside, young voices rising in the night, confident, unwavering, identical. The loudspeakers appear almost overnight, sprouting on street corners and rooftops like steel flowers. They bloom from lampposts and balconies, wired into the air itself. At first, they're used for music, marches, anthems, cheerful songs about harvests and work. But soon they carry something else. Mussolini's voice arrives through them, deep and deliberate, echoing across the piazza. It's a voice built for stone, for repetition. It rolls through the town, like thunder wrapped in authority, filling the spaces where thought used to live. You can hear it, even inside your home, muffled through shutters, turning the silence of the kitchen into a kind of audience. The sound becomes part of the landscape. When the bells ring for mass, they blend with the broadcast. When the wind shifts, the words scatter and reform, like a speech being reassembled from fragments. Sometimes the signal crackles, distorting the sentences so they sound almost human again. Hesitant, tired, uncertain. But the next broadcast restores the confidence. Believe, obey. Fight, the phrase returns like weather, regular and beyond argument. The piazza itself has changed. What used to be a market of gossip and bargaining has become a stage. On Sundays, men in black uniforms set up a wooden platform in front of the town hall, draping it with flags. Loudspeakers hang from the corners, like ornaments, and benches are arranged in precise rows. People gather because everyone else does. You stand with your family near the fountain, pretending to be casual, though it feels wrong not to look attentive. The air smells of roasting chestnuts and motor oil, of food and obedience mixed together. The announcer begins with the usual phrases, praise for the duchy, reminders of progress, and then the voice you know fills the square. Mussolini speaks from hundreds of miles away, yet the sound feels local, immediate, intimate. He praises the people's discipline, their strength, their virtue. He reminds them that the eyes of the world are watching, that Italy is no longer weak or divided. The crowd murmurs its approval, a low hum of pride and fatigue. When he pauses, you applaud, because that's what everyone does. The clapping rolls outward like surf drowning hesitation. Afterward, the speakers stay on for music. Children dance. Vendors sell roasted nuts and tricolour ribbons. The event becomes celebration rather than assembly, part carnival, part sermon. The laughter sounds too even, too measured. Even the jokes feel patriotic. When someone near you tells one about an Englishman, a Frenchman, and an Italian, the punchline always ends with the Italian winning through willpower. You laugh because it's easier than not. The piazza is busy every night now. The benches are filled with couples courting beneath banners of the fascies, mothers pushing prams, veterans in worn coats still wearing their party pins. The black shirts patrol in pairs, hands clasped behind their backs. Their presence feels almost decorative, like lampposts. When the loudspeakers play martial music, people rise automatically from their seats. You do too. The first time it happens, you tell yourself it's respect. The second time, reflex. One evening, a travelling film crew arrives to shoot newsreel footage. They set up tripods and lights, asking the townspeople to wave their flags higher, to smile bigger, to look proud for the camera. You're caught in the background of one frame, saluting at the proper angle. Weeks later, you see yourself in the cinema, just for an instant, part of the crowd cheering the Duce's speech. The audience claps when the scene appears, and for a strange moment you feel proud, though you can't say of what. Public holidays multiply. There's always something to commemorate. The founding of the Fascist Party, the anniversary of the March on Rome, the birth of the new Italy. The calendar becomes a loop of parades and pledges. Even religious festivals seem quieter now, their processions shorter, their hymns overshadowed by marching songs from the next street. The church bells and loudspeakers often overlap, their sounds twining together like two prayers to the same authority. Your wife says it's convenient that the messages no longer contradict each other. You don't answer. In the market, every stall displays a small framed portrait of Mussolini, sometimes tucked between loaves of bread or strings of garlic. The vendors say it keeps them safe from inspectors. You notice how even their jokes have begun to rhyme with slogans. "Work makes you strong," one man says when his scale breaks. Everyone laughs. The phrase was on a poster last week. When you walk home, you pass the schoolyard where the children rehearse for a youth rally. Their voices rise in unison, shrill, fervent, flawless. The same anthem follows you all the way to your door. At home, the loudspeaker across the street continues into the evening, carrying speeches from Rome. The words are too loud to ignore, too formal to understand fully. Your wife hums as she prepares supper, trying to drown the noise. The children argue about who saluted better during the parade. You find yourself correcting their posture, straightening an arm, adjusting a wrist. The gesture feels parental, almost affectionate. You realise too late that you've repeated what their teacher must have said earlier. Later, as you step outside to empty the basin, the piazza glows under electric lamps. A group of men stands beneath the statue in the centre, arguing over the newspaper. One insists that Italy will soon surpass Britain in industry. Another, that the Duce's new policies will end unemployment altogether. Their words are loud enough to sound confident, but not loud enough to invite scrutiny. When a patrol passes, the conversation shifts instantly to football scores. The silence that follows feels relieved, like a lung exhaling. You begin to sense that public speech has acquired new rules. Complaints sound like heresy now, not because anyone says so, but because they no longer fit the music of the place. Even laughter seems regulated. You can tell when it's genuine and when it's decorative. In the cafes, people laugh loudly and all at once, as if cued by an unseen conductor. You join in, careful not to lag behind. The habit becomes second nature, the same rhythm you learned for saluting, now applied to expression itself. One afternoon, during a festival, the mayor reads a telegram from Rome announcing new economic targets. The crowd cheers before he finishes the first sentence. Flags wave, horns blare, confetti fills the air. You can't even hear the words anymore, just the applause. The sound is constant, seamless, without edges. You realise that enthusiasm has replaced information. No one listens because no one needs to. A few days later, another speech echoes through the square. You arrive late and stand at the back, unable to make out what's being said over the hum of the generator. Still, when the others begin clapping, you join them. The sound swells until it becomes indistinguishable from wind. You look around and see every hand raised, every mouth smiling, every eye fixed forward. For a moment, you're certain they must feel what you feel, that odd mixture of relief and dread. Then you notice that everyone's gaze is slightly unfocused, as if watching themselves from afar. You keep clapping until your palms ache, because it's what the body knows to do. The voice from the loudspeaker fades, but the rhythm of applause continues. Someone starts chanting the Duce's name, and the crowd picks it up, chanting louder each time. Your throat burns, yet you keep shouting with them. When it finally ends, the silence that follows feels exposed, fragile, indecent. You realise that silence is no longer neutral. It has become suspicious, the absence of virtue itself. You wipe your hands on your coat, pretending to brush away dust, and wait for the next song to start. Eventually, you notice someone go missing. It begins quietly, as most disappearances do. One morning at work, a co-worker's desk sits empty, his chair tucked neatly under it, his coffee cup still half full. Someone mentions that he made an offhand remark about shortages the night before. something mild, even humorous. But no one repeats the joke. The supervisor says he's been transferred, though no one knows where. You don't ask. The next day, his name is removed from the payroll ledger, and within a week, it feels as if he never existed. People take turns filling his duties, careful not to complain. The office hums with politeness, louder than the typewriters. At first you think it's just bad luck, an isolated story. But then, another man vanishes from the factory across town, and another from the cafe, where you sometimes play cards. Their families stay for a while, then leave without farewell. Their apartments fill with new tenants, tidy, loyal, efficient. You tell yourself the country is simply organising itself, that these are the necessary corrections of order. Still, you lower your voice when you talk about them, and eventually you stop talking about them at all. The regime's newspapers publish cheerful stories about civic virtue. Every citizen a soldier of vigilance, one headline reads. There are stories about the OVRA, the secret police, described not as spies but as guardians of the national soul. They are said to keep Italy pure from disloyalty, to watch only those with something to hide. The implication is comforting and terrifying at once. You tell yourself you have nothing to hide, but still you check the window before speaking. Your neighbour across the hall becomes unusually friendly. He used to nod politely and keep to himself. Now he stops you in the stairwell to chat about politics, about how well things are going, about how grateful everyone should be. He laughs too loudly, praises too easily. You never know what he wants you to say in response. When he compliments the Duce, you agree, cautiously. When he jokes about the price of bread, you wait to see if he's serious. Every conversation feels like a test you can't study for. In the cafes, the talk grows thinner. There are still jokes, but they've lost their edge. No one risks cleverness anymore. The subjects are safe and repetitive. Football, weather, the price of olive oil. When someone lowers their voice, the others lean in, not from interest, but from anxiety. The word polizia hangs in the air like a draft. You drink your coffee quickly and leave. Even friendship feels altered. The people you've known for years seem to perform themselves, repeating the same lines, the same affirmations. You do it too. It's a language everyone now speaks, a shared grammar of safety. You praise the regime louder than you feel comfortable doing, not because you believe, but because volume has become currency. The quieter you are, the poorer you seem. The OVRA thrives on volunteers. That's the part everyone understands, but no one says. You hear that certain clerks in the post office have been rewarded for diligence, that a shopkeeper down the street received a medal for alertness. Children in school are encouraged to report unpatriotic talk at home. One day, your daughter repeats something she overheard from a neighbour, an offhand complaint about food rations. She tells you proudly that she'll mention it to her teacher. You tell her that's not necessary, that adults sometimes grumble without meaning anything. She looks confused, then disappointed, as if you failed a test she didn't know you were taking. At night, the building seems to breathe differently. You can hear voices through the thin walls, but never quite make out the words. Someone on the floor above plays the radio too loud, as if trying to prove his loyalty through decibels. Another neighbour slams his shutters each evening at the same time. Perhaps out of habit, perhaps to drown out the broadcasts. Every sound feels loaded with meaning. You start to move more quietly, to close doors with care, to lower your voice even when you're alone. One evening, you and your wife attend a neighbourhood meeting at the community hall. It's described as a cultural gathering, but everyone knows its purpose. A local party official gives a speech about vigilance and unity, about the duty to protect Italy from internal weakness. He smiles as he reminds everyone that true patriots report what they hear. Even the smallest whisper, he says, can betray the nation. The applause is thunderous. You clap too, though your hands tremble slightly. After the meeting, your neighbour claps you on the shoulder and tells you how reassuring it is to see everyone so loyal. He says it with the easy intimacy of a friend. but his eyes are alert, studying your face for something. You mirror his enthusiasm perfectly, the way you've learned to do. The two of you laugh, a little too long, before saying goodnight. The next morning, you find an anonymous note slipped under your door, reminding residents to renew their party dues. You pay yours immediately. In the days that follow, you begin to hear small rumours about who attends meetings, who doesn't, who was seen hesitating during the anthem. A woman in the next building is questioned after a quarrel with her sister-in-law. She returns home pale and quiet, her windows shuttered. No one visits her afterward, though you still hear the radio playing through the wall. You imagine her sitting perfectly still, waiting for the song to end. You start to speak in layers. There's one tone for family, one for neighbours, one for strangers. Even your silences feel rehearsed. You find yourself complimenting the government without realising it, sprinkling slogans into small talk like salt. When your wife points it out, you tell her it's safer that way. She nods but doesn't meet your eyes. One evening, as you return from work, you meet an old friend outside the grocer's, a man you've known since childhood, the sort who used to speak freely, who once told jokes about every politician alive. You talk about nothing important, the weather, the price of beans, the way the trains seem to run slower each week. Then he lowers his voice, still smiling, and says, "By the way, the police asked about you." The words hang in the air between you, weightless and unbearable. You force a smile, matching his, and ask, casually, what they wanted to know. He shrugs, says it was nothing, just routine, his grin never faltering. You tell him you understand, that of course it's nothing. You shake hands, your fingers colder than you expected, and walk home without looking back. That night, you check the locks twice before bed. You whisper goodnight to your wife, careful not to wake the children. Outside, the radio plays the evening news, the same voice repeating the same words. You lie awake long after it ends, listening to the building breathe, wondering which of your neighbours is still awake and which of them is listening. One day, the postman brings a letter that's already been opened. He doesn't try to hide it. The flap has been neatly sliced and resealed, the crease still damp from the glue. You take it without comment, pretending not to notice the faint, rectangular mark where the censor's stamp has pressed through the paper. The letter is from your cousin in Genoa, written weeks ago, but the sentences stop abruptly halfway down the page. You fold it back into the envelope and tell your wife it's just family news. She nods, not asking what kind. You both know that's easier. Censorship has become as ordinary as the weather. The newspapers arrive each morning with headlines that feel rehearsed. New triumph for the Duchy, exports rising, the people united in faith and labour. You read them out of habit, not for news but for reassurance that nothing unpredictable has happened. The photographs are always perfect. Mussolini standing on a balcony, sunlight hitting his face, as though the sky itself were part of the set. Even the captions have learned obedience. When the local paper prints a correction, it apologises not for error but for insufficient enthusiasm. The radio has replaced conversation. It sits on the sideboard like an altar, humming to life each morning with the national anthem, ending each night with the same solemn voice, reading the Duchy's words. The broadcasts arrive whether you want them or not. They come through the open window, through the courtyard, through the walls. The sound of speeches drifts between apartments like incense. Sometimes the signal cuts out, leaving a soft hiss that feels almost like relief. Your wife listens while she cooks. The voice from the radio fills the kitchen, commanding and paternal, promising prosperity if everyone continues to work and obey. She stirs the pot in rhythm with the sentences, never speaking until the broadcast ends. The children have learned to fall silent when the national music begins. Even the cat retreats under the table during speeches, curling up beside the broom as if trained to hide from attention. Every household in the building has a portrait of Mussolini now. The landlord distributed them last spring, framing them in cheap gilt and insisting it was a gesture of civic pride. Yours hangs in the dining room beside your wedding photograph. The two faces look nothing alike, yet somehow they belong together. The duchy stern and eternal, you and your wife, younger and uncertain. When you first hung it there, you told yourself it was decorum, that removing it would look odd. Now it's part of the furniture, the silent witness to every meal. You begin to lower your voice even indoors. It's not fear exactly, just habit. You've learned to measure sound the way others measure temperature. When your wife reads aloud from the newspaper, her tone is brisk and neutral, each sentence recited as though from scripture. Sometimes she pauses, eyes flicking toward the window, then continues. You do the same. The walls here are thin, and you never know who might be listening. The neighbour's wife, the caretaker, the echo itself. Letters come and go with holes in them now. Whole paragraphs vanish beneath thick black lines, inked out by an unseen hand. Once, a postcard from a friend arrived with the words, "Our country is changing so fast," blotted into illegibility. You laughed about it at the time, but quietly. Even humour feels rationed. You start writing less, and when you do, you choose your words carefully, as though you're translating yourself into a safer language. The children, sensing the shift, stop asking to send notes to their cousins. Your home feels tidier than it used to. Dust doesn't settle. The air smells faintly of disinfectant from the new cleaning regulations. Posters from the Women's Federation advise mothers to keep spotless kitchens and patriotic hearts. Cleanliness is loyalty, one declares. Your wife took it down after a week, saying it made her uncomfortable. You found her later smoothing out the wrinkles in the paper before hiding it in a drawer. The sound of marching songs replaces small talk. In the courtyard, the neighbour's boy practices trumpet every evening, his notes wobbling through Giovinezza until the rhythm becomes a lullaby. The laundry lines hang with shirts the same colour and cut. A row of identical uniforms, swaying above the cobblestones. From the window, you watch the women gather to gossip about fabric shortages and food rations. Their voices are hushed but cheerful, their sentences filled with careful pauses. You can tell when the conversation has shifted to something private. Each woman glances up toward the balconies before continuing. At night, the city grows quiet except for the hum of distant loudspeakers. The walls seem to breathe in their sleep. Sometimes, when you step onto the balcony, you can see the glow of the radio light from other apartments, tiny, synchronized suns burning in the dark. The whole building listens together, even when no one wants to. It's a strange kind of unity, one that doesn't require agreement, only endurance. Your wife begins to collect the newspapers each week, stacking them neatly under the sink. When you ask why, she says, "It's good to have them in case someone checks." You don't ask who she means. You help her smooth the pages, aligning the headlines so that the words line up perfectly. Faith, discipline, sacrifice. The ink rubs faintly onto your fingertips. You wash them twice, but the grey sheen lingers. Sometimes you try to recall what the apartment sounded like before. The chatter, the clatter of dishes, the children's laughter echoing down the hallway. Now their voices are measured, formal. Your son tells you what he learned at school, how Italy is strong, how Mussolini works harder than any man alive. Your daughter recites the national anthem before bed. You praise them both, because it's what parents do, though the words feel foreign in your mouth. Later, when the lights are out, your wife whispers that they're only children. You agree, but the phrase "only children" feels fragile, as though it could break if spoken too loud. The routine continues until the difference between public and private disappears. The walls of your apartment reflect the same colours as the piazza: red, white, green, and black. Even the curtains seem to hang straighter. When visitors come, You find yourself speaking in the same careful phrases you use at work, repeating slogans out of politeness. You can't tell whether you're performing or simply polite. The performance has lasted too long to separate from habit. One afternoon, the radio announces new achievements, the harvest exceeding expectations, factories meeting quotas, a brighter Italy for everyone. You listen while mending a loose chair leg. The words fill the room like dust. The announcer's voice rises, then fades into the national anthem. You hum along without realizing it, tapping your foot in rhythm. When the song ends, the silence feels unfinished, almost rude. You turn to your wife and ask if she's heard the latest speech. She nods automatically. Neither of you remembers what it was about. The following week, another letter arrives. This one from your brother, who writes carefully about his new job in Milan. It's signed simply, "With love, always loyal." You read it twice before realizing that the signature is not for you. You fold the letter back into the envelope and slide it under a pile of bills. That night, you notice the radio light flickering in the corner. For a moment, you imagine it blinking like an eye. The bells ring early on Sunday, louder than usual, their echoes rolling across the rooftops like a declaration. You hear them through the window as you finish buttoning your coat. Their rhythm's so jubilant, it almost sounds rehearsed. Down the street, other families are doing the same, stepping out of doorways and adjusting collars. The church has never been this full, not even at Easter. For once, everyone seems pleased. The Lateran Treaty has joined the Kingdom and the Vatican, and the newspapers call it a miracle of modern diplomacy. The priest calls it divine providence. You tell yourself it must be good when the church and the state finally speak with one voice, though you're not entirely sure whose voice that is. Inside, the church smells of incense and polish. The pews shine as if scrubbed in anticipation. A banner hangs above the altar, white, gold, and black, bearing the words Dio e Patria, God and country. The priest begins his sermon by praising Mussolini for restoring harmony between faith and authority, calling him the man through whom God's will has been revealed to Italy. His voice carries the confidence of someone who knows there will be applause, and there is. Even the old women who once frowned at politics in church now nod approvingly. You glance at your wife. Her expression is unreadable, her hands clasped too tightly in her lap. When the priest speaks of sacrifice, he does so with bureaucratic precision. He reminds the congregation that obedience to the duchy is not just loyalty, but devotion, a way to serve both heaven and earth at once. Every worker, he says, is a soldier of faith, every mother a guardian of virtue, every child a gift to God and to Italy. You listen, and the distinction between the two seems to blur with each phrase. The children in the front row, dressed in their youth uniforms, bow their heads on cue. After Mass, the square outside feels almost festive. The bells keep ringing as parishioners gather in clusters to talk about the treaty, about unity, about how lucky Italy is to be chosen by both God and history. You hear someone joke that even the saints must have joined the party by now. Everyone laughs politely. The priest moves among them like a statesman, shaking hands, offering blessings, assuring them that the church and the state will walk hand in hand from this day forward. The line between benediction and approval has vanished. You start noticing small changes in the weeks that follow. The confessional no longer feels private. The priest asks about your attendance at local rallies, about whether your children are participating in the Balilla. He notes your answers carefully, as though tallying your faith in a ledger. Once, when you hesitate before answering, he clears his throat and reminds you that loyalty to the fatherland is a form of prayer. You nod, murmur something about trust in providence, and leave feeling like you filled out a form rather than unburdened a soul. Religious processions become indistinguishable from civic parades. Statues of the Virgin glide through streets lined with flags bearing the fasces. The hymns blend seamlessly with marching songs, and the priests march beside local party officials, their robes brushing against black uniforms. At first, it seems strange to see crucifixes carried alongside fascist banners, but people grow used to it quickly. When the two symbols meet at the head of a parade, the crowd cheers louder than before. The sermons change tone too. The priest speaks more about order and duty than forgiveness. Sin is no longer a matter of conscience, but of citizenship. The word disobedience covers both spiritual and political faults, and repentance begins to sound like recruitment. Each homily feels slightly more practiced, each blessing slightly more official. Sometimes you think the priest must be exhausted by it all, but then you remember that exhaustion too can be interpreted as disloyalty. Your wife still attends regularly, more out of habit than faith. She says the church feels safe, familiar, structured, though she never lingers afterward as she once did. The candles burn shorter now. The wax is rationed, even for devotion. She lights one anyway each Sunday and whispers her prayers quickly, as if afraid to be overheard even by God. You wait by the door, watching her lips move. She finishes, crosses herself, and straightens her posture before stepping back into the daylight. The transition from believer to citizen happens in a single breath. At home, the children's catechism books have been revised. Their margins hold quotations from Mussolini, alongside verses from the Gospels. God sees everything, the text reads, and so does the state. Your son shows you a picture of St. Francis feeding the poor with one hand and saluting with the other. You tell him it's very nice, though the image unsettles you. When he asks whether the Duce prays, you say that men who carry great burdens don't have time for rest, and that seems to satisfy him. Confession day at the church grows busier. Lines form down the aisle, everyone waiting their turn to be forgiven for impatience, gossip, or insufficient zeal. The priest listens with the detachment of an accountant, dispensing absolution like signatures on permits. Occasionally, he slips a reminder into the penance. Pray for the Duce. Speak proudly of our victory in Ethiopia. Show gratitude to those who lead. You fulfill them all, though not with conviction. The prayers feel shorter each time, the meaning diluted by repetition. Rumours spread that certain priests who question the arrangement have been reassigned. One simply stopped appearing at the pulpit. Another was said to have fallen ill and sent north for rest. Their replacements are younger, smoother, and very sure of their words. They smile when they mention Mussolini's name, as though he were a biblical figure whose deeds require no interpretation. You wonder what happened to the older men, but no one asks. The congregation prefers certainty to truth. It's easier to believe in a system that believes for you. Even the festivals feel managed now. On the feast of St. Joseph, banners of the Duce hang beside the crucifix, and the choir sings a hymn rewritten to include his name. The crowd joins in willingly, their voices rising together in a harmony that sounds almost forced, though no one would call it that. You find yourself singing too because silence would stand out. When the final verse ends, the applause lasts longer than the prayer. At home that evening, your wife sets the table, as she always does, placing the bread neatly beside the wine. The radio in the next room plays a sermon, recorded from the cathedral in Rome. The bishop's voice is calm, confident, and utterly certain that God and Mussolini share the same purpose. You listen while pretending to read the newspaper, but the words blend together until you can't tell which voice belongs to which authority. The news arrives on a bright morning, shouted from the piazza before the church bells have even stopped ringing. The loudspeakers crackle, and a triumphant voice declares that Italy is at war again. This time, not for survival or revenge, but for civilization. People gather in doorways, squinting into the sunlight as if trying to see the new empire forming beyond the rooftops. The announcer's voice swells with pride. Our brave soldiers march across the African desert to bring Rome's light to the dark lands. The words are smooth, practiced, and heavy with purpose. For a moment, you almost believe them. At work, the supervisor distributes small paper flags printed with the slogan, Oro alla patria, gold for the fatherland. You're told the campaign will fund the war, that every citizen must contribute. A collection box sits by the door, and each morning workers drop in wedding rings, cufflinks, brooches. Your wife gives her mother's gold earrings, saying it's only jewellery, that they can make more. You nod and tell her she's right. Though later, when she touches her bare earlobes, you can see the doubt flicker across her face. Posters bloom across the city, bright and confident. They show African men kneeling before the Italian flag, their hands raised in gratitude, the desert behind them bursting with crops and industry. The slogans read like commandments. Italy brings civilization. The sun never sets on Rome's new empire. Children cut out the pictures and paste them into scrapbooks at school. Your son draws a soldier beside the flag and shows it proudly at dinner. Your wife smiles and praises his effort. You force a smile too, though your appetite has already faded. Ration cards appear a few weeks later. Olive oil, sugar, and coffee grow scarce. The newspapers call it a patriotic sacrifice. You tell yourself it's temporary, that the shortages mean the war is going well, yet each night the pantry looks emptier. Your wife stretches meals with stale bread and thin soups, claiming she prefers simpler food anyway. The children pretend not to notice. When your daughter asks when the soldiers will bring back chocolate, your wife tells her soon. You stay silent, counting the weeks since you last tasted sugar. The radio fills the silence with victory. Each day brings a new announcement. A city captured, an enemy routed, a flag raised high against the sun. The voice never wavers. The maps printed in the papers show a continent turning Italian, one neat border at a time. You trace the lines with your finger, realizing you can't even pronounce most of the names. The empire looks tidy on paper, orderly, and full of promise. You try not to imagine the desert itself, the heat, the flies, the sound of dying. The papers say it's a glorious campaign, clean and swift. You've learned that adjectives are safer than details. One afternoon, a column of soldiers marches through town on their way to the port. They look younger than you expected, their boots dusty, their faces already burned from training. The crowd cheers wildly. Women throw flowers. The priest blesses them as they pass. You lift your son onto your shoulders so he can see. The boy waves a small flag, shouting until his voice cracks. The soldiers smile, embarrassed and proud. Some of them glance toward the balconies, perhaps imagining how it will feel to be heroes. The propaganda grows louder as the food grows scarcer. Soap, coffee, even salt become luxuries. You trade with neighbours quietly, pretending it's charity. The baker cuts his loaves thinner, but still smiles when he weighs them. Everyone is thinner now. The posters continue to multiply, brighter than the food stalls, showing healthy families and golden harvests. Your wife tapes one near the stove, because the landlord says every home should display it. The paper curls from the heat, the smiling faces blistering at the edges. Letters from the front arrive weeks late, censored and cheerful. A cousin writes that the desert is beautiful, endless and pure. The ink trembles where he's crossed out a sentence too close to honesty. Another neighbour's son writes home about bringing order to villages, though he doesn't explain what that means. When the neighbour reads the letter aloud, she weeps anyway. It's enough to know he's still alive. At night, the children rehearse songs for school performances about the glory of empire. They sing about lions tamed, jungles conquered, the new dawn of Rome. The lyrics describe triumph, but their young voices make it sound like a lullaby. Your wife claps politely and tells them they sound wonderful. When they go to bed, she turns down the radio's volume until it's barely audible. You both sit in the quiet, staring at the small bowl of olives between you, trying to make the meal last. Rumours trickle back through the markets. People whisper about poison gas, about villages burned, about soldiers returning sick. The newspapers call these lies spread by foreign enemies. You don't know what to believe. You only know that the victory speeches come too quickly, as if the war must end before someone starts asking questions. One afternoon, a funeral procession passes through the square for a local boy who died of fever. The band plays softly, the coffin draped with both a flag and a wreath of olive branches. The crowd salutes, then disperses before anyone can start to talk. The black shirts organise parades to celebrate each new, liberated city. You're expected to attend. The streets fill with banners, the air thick with slogans and the sweet, greasy smell of roasted nuts. Children march in miniature uniforms, waving toy rifles. The mayor gives a speech about sacrifice, about how even hunger is holy when it serves the fatherland. The applause sounds tired but obedient. You join in because silence would stand out. The war ends almost as abruptly as it began. The radio announces total victory. Ethiopia pacified, the empire secure. Mussolini's voice cracks with triumph as he declares that Italy has regained her ancient glory. The bells ring again, as they did on the day the war began, and people pour into the streets to celebrate. Flags wave from every balcony, and the square becomes a sea of colour. But the cheering feels practiced now, the joy too thin to fill the air. You clap because it's what's expected, because the rhythm is familiar, but the sound feels hollow. A few weeks later, the soldiers return. The parade is smaller this time, quieter. The men step off the trains carrying dust-coloured bags and eyes that don't quite focus. Their boots leave small clouds of sand on the cobblestones. Some limp, others stare straight ahead. The crowd cheers half-heartedly, uncertain whether to celebrate or pity them. When they pass the fountain, you notice one soldier drop his flag. No one picks it up. The newspapers call the empire eternal. The radio calls it divine. The ration cards, however, remain. Bread is still scarce and olive oil costs more than ever. The posters begin to peel from the walls, their edges curling inward like closing hands. Your wife stops saving the newspapers. There's no point now. The victory has already been printed enough times to make it real. That evening the city feels strangely still. The loudspeakers hum but say nothing. You step onto the balcony and look down at the street, where the last of the soldiers are walking home, their footsteps dragging through the dust. One of them carries a handful of desert sand in a tin, a souvenir of triumph. At dinner, the children ask if the soldiers brought back gold or silk, or something exotic. Your wife shakes her head and says they brought back peace. You stare at the table, at the half-empty plates, at the portrait of the Duce watching over you with his unchanging smile. The empire has expanded on paper. Your stomach has not. One morning you open the newspaper and see a small notice between the weather report and the cinema listings, printed in the same calm typeface used for recipes and train schedules. It declares that certain professions, teachers, doctors, lawyers, and civil servants, are now reserved for Aryans. The word feels clinical, almost bureaucratic. You read it twice, expecting outrage or at least confusion from the people around you, but the cafe remains as quiet as ever. Someone folds their paper, another stirs their coffee. The sentence slides into public life without resistance, as smooth as the ink it's printed in. At first it doesn't seem real. The laws are abstract, far away, the kind of thing that happens to other people, in other places. But then you notice small changes. The tailor's shop on the corner, owned by the same family for decades, closes suddenly. The shutters stay down for a week before a new sign appears. Under new management. The newspapers call it reorganization. You pass by and see the family's youngest son standing on the sidewalk, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, staring at the window as though the reflection might still belong to him. You nod in greeting, but he looks away. The government insists that these changes are necessary for the good of the nation, that the Italian race must be purified, strengthened, protected. The radio explains that this is not hatred, but hygiene. The word purification repeats so often that it starts to lose meaning, like a chant recited until it turns to sound. You tell yourself it's just another policy, another decree that will fade in time. Yet every day, the air feels slightly heavier. At work, new forms arrive requiring declarations of ancestry. Everyone fills them out carefully, as if competing to prove something invisible. The clerk at the next desk jokes that soon they'll start measuring skulls. No one laughs. You remember hearing about similar tests in Germany, but you thought Italy was different. More civilized, more merciful. The papers insist these are Italian solutions for Italian problems. They never say what the problems are. A week later, the headmaster at your daughter's school posts a list of names on the door. It's short, typed neatly, with a heading that reads, "Suspended until further notice." The children whisper that these are the students who aren't like the others. When your daughter asks what that means, you tell her it's complicated. She nods, though she's old enough to know when adults are lying. In the marketplace, familiar faces vanish one by one. The pharmacist who used to give discounts to pensioners is gone, his shop now bearing the name of a man you've never met. The grocer across the street replaces the old Forza Italia sign with one that reads, Jew-free zone. You stand outside pretending to read the fruit prices while trying not to see it. The clerk behind the counter avoids your eyes. You used to know his family, used to stop and chat about weather and politics, back when it was still possible to do so without danger. Some people seem relieved by the changes. They say it's about protecting jobs, restoring order, making room for the truly Italian. They use the word normality often, as if exclusion were a form of balance. You hear neighbours saying the Jews were rich anyway, that they'll manage, that none of this is cruel if it's law. The reasoning sounds smooth, practiced, like something learned from the radio. You notice that those who speak loudest about purity are also the ones with the cleanest windows and the brightest flags. Your wife grows quiet. She was close with the tailor's wife. The two of them used to trade recipes and gossip while mending clothes together. Now the tailor's apartment is empty, its windows covered with brown paper. One night, your wife leaves a small parcel of food by their door, even though no one lives there anymore. When you ask her why, she says it feels wrong to leave it empty. The next morning, the parcel is gone. She never mentions it again. The church offers little comfort. The priest, once careful to stay neutral, now preaches about moral order and divine selection. He says that every people has its destiny, and that Italy's destiny is to lead by purity. His words are cautious, but the meaning is clear. The congregation listens with the same stillness they give to political speeches. After Mass, no one lingers outside the church anymore. Conversations are shorter, eyes a little sharper. You sense that everyone is measuring one another, silently sorting friends from liabilities. Letters begin to arrive from abroad, describing families forced to leave, businesses confiscated, synagogues vandalized. You read them in private, then burn them in the stove before the children wake. The smoke smells of paper and fear. Your wife watches the ashes rise and says, "It's better not to get involved." You agree. But that night you dream of faces pressed against train windows, of cities that forget their own names. The newspapers print photographs of the new Italian colonies in Africa. Smiling soldiers, grateful natives, proof of a superior race fulfilling its destiny. The headlines talk about unity, discipline, regeneration. Between the lines you can sense something tightening. It's as if the whole country is shrinking into itself, erasing whatever doesn't fit the picture. You walk through town and realise how quiet it's become. Even the loudspeakers seem softer, their songs more subdued, as if the country is whispering to itself now. At the school, more desks are empty. The teacher erases names from the register with a ruler, methodical and calm. Your daughter sits in silence while the other children copy a new motto from the blackboard. Italy for Italians. The teacher's hand trembles slightly as she writes it, though her voice never falters. When your daughter returns home that afternoon, she doesn't speak. She sets her satchel down and stares at the floor. Only later, at dinner, does she ask the question you've been dreading. "Papa," she says, "where did Rebecca go?" You look up from your plate, but the words don't come easily. You tell her they moved north, that her friend's father found work elsewhere. She nods slowly, pretending to believe you. Her fork rests untouched beside her bowl. Across the table, your wife lowers her eyes, saying nothing. The silence between the three of you feels heavier than the air itself. You reach for your glass and take a long sip, the sound of it loud in the quiet room. That night, as the children sleep, you stand by the window and stare at the darkened street. The posters on the wall glow faintly under the lamplight. Bold letters, clean images, promises of order. Somewhere beyond the rooftops, the radio plays another speech about purity and strength. The voice is calm, confident, almost tender. You close the window, but the words still find their way in. The empire has its laws now, and the laws have their ghosts. Years pass by, and eventually there's an announcement through the radio. It's evening, and the family sits around the table, the room lit by a single bulb that hums faintly with each surge of power. Your wife is sewing a patch into your son's jacket. Your daughter clearing the dishes from dinner when the familiar voice cuts through the static. Mussolini's tone is grave and exultant all at once. Italy stands with Germany, united against tyranny, destined to shape the world anew. The phrasing is grand, almost theatrical, but the air in the room feels heavy. Your son looks up, his face unreadable beneath the shadow of adolescence. Your daughter pauses at the sink, the plate still in her hands. Outside, cheers erupt in the piazza. The church bells join in. Someone fires a pistol into the air, though it sounds more like a warning shot than a celebration. The next morning, the newspaper headline is pure triumph. A new dawn for Europe. Below it, a photograph of Mussolini and Hitler standing shoulder to shoulder. Two silhouettes against a horizon of flags. The editor calls it a marriage of iron. You read it aloud to your wife as she butters the last of the stale bread. She murmurs, "Iron rusts," and goes back to her work. You glance toward the open window before replying, though there's no one outside to hear. The radio hums softly from the corner, already broadcasting martial music. The brass sounds triumphant, but the tune has begun to drag, like a parade that's lost its rhythm. Bread lines lengthen as the parades shorten. The bakery shelves are bare before noon, and the loaves that remain are thinner, coarser, smelling faintly of sawdust. The woman ahead of you whispers that her husband was drafted that morning. The man behind her mutters that the flour is mixed with beans now. Everyone speaks softly, glancing at the door each time it opens. When your turn comes, the baker shrugs and says he's done for the day. You take the ration of crusts he offers and walk home past posters of smiling soldiers, their bayonets gleaming like silver promises. Your son, now nearly grown, watches the departing troops with a mixture of awe and unease. They're only a few years older than he is. Boys who once marched beside him in school parades, now marching toward a desert or a mountain front they've never seen. He waves a small flag out of reflex, but his hand drops quickly. Later that night, he asks if you think the war will last long. You tell him no, that Italy always wins quickly. The words feel practiced, but his silence afterward feels older than either of you. Your daughter is 17 now, tall and sharp-eyed, her hair tied back in a plain ribbon. She queues with her mother each morning, waiting for bread, for oil, for whatever the ration cards will allow. She doesn't complain, only sighs when she sees the propaganda posters calling hunger a noble sacrifice. Once, as she returns from the market, she tears a poster half loose from the wall. The paper flaps like a wounded bird in the wind. You say nothing, neither does she. The radio's voice grows louder as everything else grows smaller. It speaks of victories in Greece, triumphs in Africa, ships sunk in the Mediterranean. The announcer's tone never wavers. He sounds less like a man than an echo of certainty. You stop listening to the content and start listening to his rhythm. How his pauses shrink when the news is bad. How his breath catches just before he says, "Success." You find yourself counting those pauses like ration stamps, measuring how long the illusion will last. Each night, the city dims its lights to prepare for air raids. The children, though they are hardly children now, help tape the windows in crisscross patterns to prevent the glass from shattering. Your wife keeps a small bag packed by the door. Candles, bread, water, a Bible. When the sirens first wail, the sound slices the air like a blade. You rush downstairs to the shelter with your family, your son carrying the lantern, your daughter clutching her mother's hand. The air inside the cellar smells of mildew and fear. People pray in low voices, others simply stare at the floor. When the bombs finally fall, the ground shudders, and the dust rains down like grey snow. You think of the men overseas and wonder whether they hear the same sound. When the all-clear siren sounds, you climb back upstairs to find cracks in the plaster, a broken vase, and the radio still humming. Your wife lights a candle, and for a moment the flame looks like a small act of defiance. The broadcast resumes, uninterrupted, announcing another victory somewhere far away. You sit down at the table, brush the dust from your sleeves, and realize that war has already moved in. It eats with you, sleeps beside you, fills the silence when conversation stops. The ration cards change again. Olive oil and sugar are no longer just scarce. They're completely gone. Coffee exists only as rumour. Your wife invents substitutes for everything. Barley for coffee, carrots for sweetness, hope for truth. The newspapers praise the creative resilience of the Italian homemaker. You trade soap for bread with the neighbour downstairs. He calls it bartering. You call it survival. The children pretend not to notice when you eat less than they do. You tell them you're not hungry, and they pretend to believe you. The old men in the piazza talk loudly about destiny, about empire, about how Italy has chosen the right side of history. Their words sound like nostalgia rehearsed as prophecy. One of them mentions Rome's glory, another quotes Latin phrases no one understands anymore. You wonder if they believe it, or if belief itself has become a form of nostalgia. When they salute each other at the end of their argument, their hands shake from age, not conviction. News arrives in fragments now, each piece smaller than the last. The neighbour across the hall hears that our army is advancing in Egypt. The woman at the bakery says her cousin's husband hasn't written in 3 months. The postman shakes his head but says nothing. You begin to rely on rumour the way people once relied on prayer, grasping at it, knowing it won't change anything. The bombers come more often. Their droning hum becomes part of the city's rhythm, as familiar as church bells once were. Your daughter keeps a journal now, though she hides it between the mattress and the wall. Once, while tidying, your wife finds it and reads a few lines aloud. "I used to think the Duce protected us. Now I think he only listens to the sky." Your wife closes the book carefully and puts it back. Neither of you mentions it again. The schools stay open, though barely. Your son attends when he can, studying engineering by candlelight at home. He wants to build things, he says. Bridges, engines, anything that connects instead of destroys. You nod, proud and sad at once. His future, like the country's, feels theoretical. The parades have grown smaller. The banners hang faded. The uniforms less crisp. When the loudspeakers play the national anthem, people still rise to their feet, but the movement lacks conviction. It's not rebellion that keeps them seated longer each time. It's fatigue. The slogans sound hollow now, stripped of meaning by repetition. Italy will prevail, the radio insists, but the voice cracks on the final word. The war continues, though no one knows how well or how poorly. The newspapers have stopped printing maps. The government insists on progress, but progress now means survival, and even that feels uncertain. Each night, you listen to the sirens, the hum of bombers, the steady breathing of your sleeping family. Your daughter talks in her sleep sometimes, murmuring fragments of school songs turned into prayers. Your son grinds his teeth. You reach for your wife's hand in the dark, her fingers cold as stone. Weeks turn into months, and months into years. The radio still speaks, though the voice sounds tired now, brittle with strain. The bread grows grey and thin, the water metallic. You no longer ask for news of victory because you know what silence means. The sirens start before dawn. Their sound cuts through the half-dreaming dark, rising and falling, like a human voice crying for help. You're on your feet before your eyes are open, reaching for the children, for your wife, for anything that feels solid. The floor trembles, not from the bombs yet, but from the rush of feet above you. Someone is shouting from the stairwell, though the words are lost in the noise. You grab your shoes, but not your coat. Your son pulls his sister by the wrist, and together you run barefoot into the shelter beneath the building. The air inside is already warm and close, thick with the smell of dust and candle wax. The others are there before you. Families huddle on benches, shoulders pressed together, eyes wide and unfocused. Someone has brought a radio, but the signal keeps breaking, the voice from Rome stuttering between bursts of static. A single candle flickers in the middle of the room, its flame bending with each tremor. The ceiling dust falls like grey snow. You can hear the planes before you feel the impact, the low hum that swells until it becomes part of your pulse. Then the first bomb lands somewhere close enough to rattle the door hinges. The sound is less like thunder and more like tearing fabric, like the sky itself coming apart. The children don't scream anymore. They've learnt not to. They press their faces against your arm, waiting for the second explosion, and the third, and the endless aftershocks of falling stone. The building above you groans. Someone begins to pray in Latin, their voice trembling in rhythm with the blasts. Your wife whispers the same words under her breath, not from belief, but from memory. You reach for her hand, feel the fine grit on her skin, and squeeze until the shaking passes. Hours blur together underground. Time becomes sound. The whistle of bombs, the distant crash, the occasional silence that might mean safety or reload. Someone passes around a jug of water. You take a sip and hand it to the next person without looking up. The candle burns lower, its wax spilling down the bottle that holds it. The air grows hotter, thicker. You breathe through your sleeve and try to remember what morning used to sound like. When the bombs stop, no one moves at first. The silence feels fragile, temporary. A man near the door opens it a crack, then wider. The light that enters isn't sunlight, but smoke, a grey glow that smells of burnt plaster and iron. You climb the stairs slowly, your legs unsteady, and emerge into a street that no longer has edges. The buildings lean inward like broken teeth. Roofs have vanished. Windows gape open without glass. You can see the sky in places where walls used to stand. The city looks as if it has been erased and redrawn by a careless hand. The bakery, where you once queued for bread, is gone, reduced to a mound of bricks and white dust. The fountain in the piazza still runs, though the water runs dark. You step carefully around a crater filled with debris. Shoes, paper, fragments of tile. The smell of smoke clings to your throat. Somewhere nearby, a siren continues to wail, long after the danger has passed, as if it no longer knows how to stop. Neighbours wander through the ruins like ghosts, calling names that no one answers. A woman clutches a birdcage without a bird. An old man sits in the doorway of a collapsed house, turning a rosary through his fingers, the beads coated with soot. Children pick through the rubble, looking for anything familiar, a spoon, a toy, a shoe. You realise how quiet the crowd is, how no one weeps aloud anymore. The grief has turned inward, heavy and wordless. You make your way back toward your building, stepping over shattered glass and twisted metal. The stairwell still stands, though half the roof is gone. Inside, the air smells of damp stone and singed fabric. The apartment door hangs crooked on its hinges. You push it open and find what's left. A table overturned, plaster on the floor. The cupboard doors blown wide like startled wings. The window above the sink is gone, replaced by sky. You walk to the corner of the room where the radio used to sit, now silent and buried under dust. The cord trails into nothing. Your wife and children follow you inside. They move slowly, as though afraid the walls might collapse at the sound of a footstep. Your daughter picks up a cracked teacup, brushes the dust away, and sets it back down. Your son kneels beside the window frame, peering at the street below, where smoke still drifts between the ruins. You try to think of what to say, something practical, something to begin again with, but the words won't form. The silence feels heavier than any sound. The government calls the bombings proof of Italy's courage. The radio, when it works, insists that the nation is unbreakable, that victory is near. Mussolini's voice still reaches you sometimes, through the static louder than the sirens, promising retribution and destiny. But no one listens anymore. The words have become background noise, like the hum of power lines, always there but without meaning. When the broadcasts end, the silence that follows feels more truthful. Each night you return to the shelter, carrying what little remains of your possessions, a blanket, a loaf, a photograph that survived in the drawer beneath the bed. The people down there have stopped introducing themselves. Names feel temporary now. The candle burns lower each time, its flame reflected in 20 pairs of eyes. You sit shoulder to shoulder with strangers, breathing the same stale air, listening for footsteps above that never come. Someone hums a lullaby, too quietly to recognise. Your wife rests her head on your shoulder and closes her eyes. You count the breaths between explosions, telling yourself that rhythm is a kind of order. Days blend into one another. The city shrinks, its familiar landmarks reduced to heaps of stone. Markets move underground. Bread is baked in cellars. The smell of ash seeps into everything. Your clothes, your skin, your sleep. The children no longer ask when the war will end. They no longer speak of the future at all. Your son helps shovel rubble from the courtyard, his face streaked with soot. Your daughter volunteers at the church, tending to the wounded who arrive without names. She comes home smelling of smoke and antiseptic, her eyes older than they should be. The bombers return without warning, sometimes at midday, sometimes at night. You don't run anymore. You move automatically, carrying the candle, the blanket, the bread. The body learns what the mind refuses to accept. Each time you descend into the shelter, you wonder what will be gone when you return. The answer is always something: a street, a neighbour, a part of yourself. One morning, after a night of relentless bombing, the sirens finally stop. The silence that follows feels unnatural, as though the city itself has forgotten to breathe. You climb the stairs with your family and step out into the pale light. The air is thick with dust that glitters faintly in the sun. Half the street is gone. The bakery is a crater, the church a shell. The air tastes of iron and smoke. You stand in the doorway, staring at the ruins of your home. The wind moves through the empty windows, stirring papers and bits of cloth. Eventually, word spreads through the ruined streets that Mussolini has been arrested. The news passes from mouth to mouth like a secret that no one dares to speak too loudly. A woman in the breadline whispers it to her neighbour. A soldier on leave repeats it in disbelief. A priest mentions it quietly between prayers. For a moment, the air feels lighter. People smile without meaning to. Their faces uncertain. Their joy fragile as glass. Then a few days later, the radio announces that he's been freed, rescued by German troops. The smiles vanish as quickly as they came. By the next week, rumours claim he's been executed. No one knows what to believe anymore. The truth, like everything else, seems to have been bombed out of existence. The city is still half rubble, half life. The walls are plastered with new posters printed overnight. One proclaiming the birth of the Italian Social Republic, another promising vengeance against traitors, another announcing ration cuts. The same space on the wall that once held slogans about empire now carries orders for bread distribution. Every corner smells of smoke and mildew. The loudspeakers are mostly silent now, their wires hanging loose like veins cut open. Only the German patrols remain constant, their boots echoing down empty streets, precise as a metronome. You begin to see fear wearing new uniforms. The black shirts are gone or have changed colours. Some wear the armbands of the partisans now. The same men who once shouted, "Viva il Duce," now whisper about democracy. The shift happens so quickly, it feels rehearsed, like a play changing scenes, while the audience is still clapping. In the piazza, the statue of Mussolini, that once towered above the fountain, lies on its side, face first in the dust. Children throw stones at it, laughing. The nose is broken off, the marble split down the middle. Your son, now a young man, stands beside you watching. He doesn't join in, but he doesn't look away either. People tear down the banners, scrape the slogans from the walls, burn old newspapers in the square. The smoke smells faintly of ink and history. The same shopkeepers who once displayed the Duce's portrait now hang signs that read, "Loyal to the people." A neighbour knocks on your door, asking if you still have your membership badge from the party. He says it's best to get rid of it. You nod and hand it over, though you know he'll probably sell it or trade it for food. That night you hear him singing in the stairwell, the same man who used to salute the loudspeaker every morning. The song isn't about Mussolini or victory or Rome. It's just a folk tune, something about spring. For the first time in years, the melody doesn't sound like propaganda. It sounds like relief. The newspapers change names again. Now they call themselves Free Italy or The New Voice. The editorials praise the courage of the resistance and condemn the lies of the regime. You read them with a strange kind of detachment, half remembering the same pages from a year ago, filled with words like glory and destiny. The writers are the same, only the vocabulary has changed. Everyone claims they were forced, that they never believed, that they were waiting for the right moment to speak. You find yourself nodding along, agreeing, adding your voice to the chorus of denial. It's easier than silence. The church returns to its old prayers. Though the sermons sound cautious, practiced, the priest speaks of forgiveness, of healing, of moving forward. He never mentions names. The congregation nods solemnly, and afterward, people linger outside the church again as they used to, trading stories of hardship and hope. Someone says that Mussolini's body has been hung in Milan, that people lined up to see it. Someone else says that can't be true, that such things don't happen to leaders, only to villains. The conversation ends with a shrug. No one argues, everyone seems exhausted by certainty. The Germans retreat north, their convoys heavy with loot and silence. The Allies push closer each day. You can hear the artillery at night, a low rhythmic thud that sounds almost like a heartbeat. Your wife counts the days aloud, marking them on the calendar until she runs out of space. Your daughter helps at the aid station near the church, handing out bread and water to whoever arrives. She comes home each night, covered in dust, her eyes distant but calm. She doesn't speak about what she's seen. You don't ask. When liberation finally comes, it doesn't feel like triumph. The tanks roll through the streets, and people wave flags they've sewn from scraps of fabric, shouting words that feel too large for their throats. The soldiers smile, throwing cigarettes and chocolate to the children. The air smells of gunpowder and rain. You stand at the edge of the crowd with your wife and children, watching as strangers embrace, laugh, cry. A man nearby tears open his shirt to reveal the scars of old beatings, shouting that he never stopped resisting. Another insists he hid Jews in his cellar. Perhaps he did. Perhaps they all did. The applause drowns out doubt. Overnight, the city transforms again. Portraits of the Duchy are replaced with flags of the Republic. The old slogans are painted over with new ones. Freedom, unity, justice. The same walls that once demanded obedience now promise democracy. Yet something in the rhythm feels familiar. The speeches still echo through the piazza. The crowds still clap at the right moments. The words have changed, but the choreography remains. You wonder if the habit of belief can ever truly be broken, or if it simply changes its uniform like everyone else. At home, the dust has settled. The window you repaired last month lets in the smell of spring. Your wife hangs laundry where the flag once hung, the sheets snapping in the wind like quiet applause. The children are grown now, old enough to speak without fear, though they rarely do. The radio, repaired but cautious, plays new voices. The old ones have vanished, leaving only static where certainty used to be. One day, you finally hear the news. After years of shifting fronts and occupations, the war is finally, truly over. The radio says it softly, almost apologetically, as if the words themselves are unsure. No parades, no grand speeches this time, just the faint crackle of static between phrases. You stand by the window, looking out at the courtyard, where your wife hangs the laundry, where the flag once hung. The sheets billow gently in the wind, white and ordinary. For a moment, the sight startles you. It's been so long since anything that colour didn't mean something. She shakes out the fabric, the movement slow and steady, and you realise you've forgotten what the simple act of doing something without purpose feels like. The city smells of damp plaster and dust. Every building seems older now, stooped under the weight of its own history. The rubble has been cleared from the main streets, but the scars remain. Blackened stone, shattered windows, entire facades replaced with plywood. The loudspeakers are silent, their wires still dangling, swaying slightly in the spring wind. You walk past them on your way to the market, half expecting them to come alive again, to fill the air with orders or hymns or lies. But they don't. The silence feels strange, like an unoccupied room in your own house. The radio at home plays music again, real music, waltzes, folk songs, voices without slogans attached. You sit by it one evening and let the melody fill the space where speeches used to live. The sound is uneven, fragile, alive. You hear laughter drifting from the courtyard, someone singing off key, and for the first time in years, you realise that imperfection has a sound too. Your daughter hums along as she cleans the table, her voice low, uncertain. Your son listens quietly, staring at the dial as though waiting for the next command. But none comes. The children no longer march. Their uniforms, faded and too small, sit folded in a drawer you've all agreed not to open. Your daughter helps your wife at the market now, bartering for what little there is. Your son repairs bicycles, fixing what's broken because it's something he can control. They move carefully through the days as if still waiting for orders that never arrive. Once you find your son polishing his old youth brigade pin. You ask him why he's kept it, and he shrugs. It's just metal, he says, but his tone is uncertain. You nod, not pressing further. You're not sure whether the gesture would mean defiance or nostalgia. The piazza feels too large without its banners. The fountains run again, though the statues are scarred, their marble pitted with shrapnel. On Sundays, people gather there out of habit, but there's no purpose to it now. They talk about rebuilding, about shortages, about relatives still missing. No one mentions the Duchy. No one mentions the war. It's as if the entire city has decided to speak in the present tense only. You join them sometimes, standing at the edge of the crowd, listening to conversations that circle around absence. The silence between sentences feels heavier than the words themselves. Freedom, when it comes, feels disorganized. Trains run irregularly. Markets open late. New officials appear every week, each with their own version of the future. The newspapers declare a republic, then a provisional government, then an election. You can't keep track of which promises are real. Your wife says it doesn't matter who rules, as long as they let people rest. You want to agree, but rest feels unfamiliar, almost dangerous. The quiet makes you nervous. You've spent so long listening for danger that you no longer trust safety. The church bells ring again, but their tone has changed. It's softer now, less certain, as if testing its voice. The priest preaches forgiveness and unity, his words echoing through the cracked nave. The congregation bows their heads, not in obedience but exhaustion. Your wife lights a candle for the dead, and the flame trembles like a heartbeat. You watch the wax drip down the brass holder, thinking of all the other wax that melted for different causes. Patriotism, empire, faith. It all leaves the same residue. At home, the rhythm of life tries to return, though it limps. You repair the window shutters yourself, hammering nails into splintered wood. The sound startles you. It's the first purposeful noise you've made in months. Your wife plants basil in a cracked pot on the windowsill, saying that if something can grow here, perhaps everything else can too. The children laugh when the first sprout appears, as if the world has given them proof that it's still capable of life. The laughter sounds unsteady but real. You cling to it more tightly than you'd like to admit. In the evenings, the neighbours talk from balcony to balcony again, their voices crossing the courtyard like birds finding their way home. The conversations wander, the price of flour, the shortage of coal, the rumours of trials for those who collaborated too eagerly. Everyone has a story about someone else, a reason why they had no choice. You listen, nodding, sometimes even adding your own version to the collection. The habit of justification dies slowly. You tell yourself it's harmless, that everyone needs to rewrite their past to survive the present. But when you lie awake at night, the silence presses against your chest, heavy and cold. You begin to notice small changes in how people carry themselves. The salute has disappeared, replaced by a kind of cautious informality. People nod instead of gesturing. They smile more, though it feels practiced. No one says believe, obey, fight anymore, but you can still feel the echo of it in the pauses between words. Sometimes, as you walk through the square, you think you catch someone raising their hand out of habit, only to stop halfway. The gesture dies in the air, unfinished. One afternoon, you pass a wall that once bore a mural of Mussolini's face. It's been painted over in pale blue, though the outline still shows faintly beneath, like a ghost refusing to fade. Children chase a ball across the square, their shouts bright and ordinary. A gust of wind sends dust spiralling upward, catching the sunlight, and for a fleeting moment, it looks like smoke again. You blink, and it's gone. The air smells faintly of spring. You wait for a new order to emerge, some voice to tell you what comes next, but none does. The radio speaks of reconstruction, of elections, of freedom, but the words sound abstract, weightless. Freedom, you realise, is not a voice at all. It's the absence of one. It's loud, uneven, human. It frightens you. There are no correct gestures anymore, no rehearsed applause, no certainty about what comes after obedience. You find yourself longing for the predictability of the old rhythm, even as you know what it cost. Your wife tells you to go outside more, to take walks, to breathe. She says the air is cleaner now that the fires are out. One evening, as the light fades, you do. The streets are quiet, the windows open to the cooling air. You pass the fountain, still cracked but running, its water catching the last of the daylight. The city hums softly with life, footsteps, laughter, the distant clatter of dishes, ordinary sounds, unremarkable, uncoordinated. You realise it's been years since the world sounded this way. You reach the edge of the piazza and stop. The sky above is streaked with purple and ash, the colour of endings and beginnings. The air feels different now, lighter, uncertain. You look around, half expecting to see a policeman, a patrol, a neighbour leaning out the window to watch. But no one is there. For the first time in years, no one is watching. You stand still, unsure of what to do with the freedom of being unobserved. The silence stretches outward, vast and alive. You listen, waiting for another speech, another command, some familiar voice to fill the void. None comes. There is only the sound of the wind through the empty streets, the rustle of laundry drying in the dark, and the faint rhythm of your own breath. And that brings us to the end of tonight's story. Feel free to like, subscribe, or leave a comment with another forgotten corner of history you'd like explored next. If you'd like early access to more of these quiet descents into forgotten history, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, there's a link to the Patreon in the description. If you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps more people find their way to these stories. And special thanks to the supporters who make this show possible, including our chroniclers, Andrew S. and Rich Davis. Sleep well.